I belong to clinical psychology tradition, and I can say regarding my discipline is that is quite almost totally colonized by a patriarchal point of view and perspective, and very few and separated, deconnected experiences try to contrast the so-called cognitive empire. So I don't want to introduce you more because I think you are the best to continue to complete your presentation. And thank you very much to be here, and very encouraging to listen to you.
Thank you very much. Ciao everyone. Ciao everyone. Who is there? Okay, ciao. Okay, English, right?
Yeah, English, because the most of the audience is English speaker.
Okay.
So yeah, we will appreciate that. Anyway, if we have some work where people is more confident in talking in their mother tongue, exclude the Iranian and some quite local and language, or as we have a Palestinian girl somewhere around, so Arabic is maybe Arabic. You could help us a little bit.
So if
you English or Italian?
Yeah, if you're speaking Italian, it's fine. We translate. Okay, let's try to be flexible. So, I'm very glad to be here. Thank you so much, Guido, for organizing these lectures. I think it's really when we talk about, you know, how I feel, what can we do to be anti-racist? I think also organizing this kind of spaces paid. We are paid actually to do these lectures, and I say that because there is a work to get funding, and not all the time is possible or people are willing. So there is this assumption that intellectual work, as you may know, is free, right? So it's important to say that finding resources and time besides our working hours to create this event is really important, and also the reading groups and the you know, the self-education. So I think I was really happy to be here today. I'm really glad we're only 20 maybe, which is good, perfect, because I really wanted to do something interactive. And I can see the space is already well made, and was expecting an amphitheater where I was 2 meters away from people, but this is very good. So I don't know if you can show some slides or...
Yeah, sure. You can show here. You can show even with the web.
If you have
the key.
Cable.
Yeah.
I have a...
There, under your cover, there is my keys. Under your cover, the laptop cover, the keys, and there is, yeah.
I can put, if you have the cable, I can... okay. Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll put it here. Okay. Let me see.
We need some water.
Okay, just because I have my
Acqua, water.
Il problema è che io non posso togliere la mia chiavettina perché ho aperto 20.000 finestre e purtroppo questa c'è solo una volta, questa ce n'ha 6.
E questa io posso metterla forse qua, no? No.
Allora facciamo così, aspetta, te la mando.
Sei troppo avanzata, come tu puoi vedere, questa è quella che di tecnologia ti posso fare.
Sì, no, va benissimo, sto solo pensando, perché
se vuoi spedirmela via email.
Vero, però non ho
Leggo ce l'hai?
Sì, però non riesco a connettere. No, era tanto Toronto. Vabbè, solo che funziona. Però abbiamo i video guest. Ah, perfetto, come solito. Quindi ti metto la mia informazione lì, vediamo, bello, dovrebbe essere qua. Mi sembra che l'ho salvato anche qua. Save as. E ora la mettiamo copia e la tua però qual è? Ah, non è collegato, aspetta, ecco, sta scollegato. Voilà. Eccola, eccola qui, perfetto. Quindi la mettiamo in F.
Sì.
E...
Eccoci, ci siamo.
Oddio. Così metti belle nella
È questo?
no, quella sotto, perfetto. Forse un po' di cose, ci stanno 50.000 slides. Ecco.
Allora, share screen, so we can make these slides visible even online. Do you have any video or anything there? Sure.
Sì.
Okay,
Sì.
so optimize, optimize.
This fai share computer audio.
Ok.
Ok.
Ok, e we can change the slide.
Adesso sì, in realtà la possiamo iconizzare.
Ok.
Ecco, perfetto. Ok, quindi, so we were saying, yes, very happy to be here, and I'm really glad that we're not many, so we will be able to interact, talk to each other, to introduce each other. So that's really, really important. So, mettiamo presentazione, slides, metti
Vuoi mettere...
la presentation mode, così diventa grande. Allora, okay, so what I would like to talk about today is obviously this kind of topics, race, racism, identity, all topics that you don't see. Okay, perfect. So topics that are part of my research, but also I have thought about it also in my own life because they are things that I think a lot about it, and so I also teach them. And so I think it's important that when we talk about it, obviously we talk about delicate issues, personal issues. Hopefully we will share about each other today. And so let's, pay attention to the language we use. Also, there are obviously no stupid comments or ideas. We don't know each other, but I think this is really our space. So let's make the most out of it, very often when we talk about race, especially people feel they feel a bit ashamed to talk about it or to share certain comments. And so I really would like to say that we don't judge each other in this room. So that's really important too. Feel free to speak. And let's try to create for this couple of hours a safe space where, as I said, we pay attention to the language, but we also share what we think. That's the point. And also challenge assumptions. So I will ask you to reflect on certain things that would be taken for granted or maybe not. So it's also to be in a frame of mind where we want to challenge also who we are. Okay, so sharing, I would start from me. So as you know, I'm Angelica. I am a professor now in Canada at the University of Toronto. I was born and raised in Italy. And I was a child in the 1980s. So I was raised in Reggio Emilia, Pianura Padana, very quiet, very calm. But I could see that in the 80s, when I was going to school, when I was going on a bus, when I was going around, I was the only one who was not white. So I was not colorblind. I didn't have doubts about my identity. I was Italian, but I could also see that I was the only one with the brown skin. And so was the questions of people that I got since a very young age that started to make me question who I was and why I was getting this kind of question. So here there are some scenarios, as you can see, these are real scenarios that maybe some of you are familiar with. So classic, where are you from? I'm from Rome. Where are you really from? So it's really wow, you speak such a good Italian. What did you learn? Well, I'm Italian. Really? You don't look like it. And the third one here is interesting because I was in the UK. I was in Leeds in a very open, progressive space, queer space, anti-racist, anti-sex, perfect space. And I was an Italian man, just there, a white Italian man. I was talking to my Black British friend, Ama, who wanted to know some words of Italian. So I was telling her words. And this guy, who was just by himself having a drink, he felt entitled to intervene in our conversation and making this sort of interrogation. So as you can say, so he said, so do you speak Italian? Yes. So imagine I'm with my friend, I don't know who this guy is, but I'm Italian, yes. And where are you from? Rome. No, but where are you really from? And sometimes you don't want to play this game. Sometimes you see the intention, so other times you don't want to play this game. And so that night I didn't want to play the game. And so I said, what do you mean? Your origins. I told you, I'm Italian, I'm from Rome. And then he wanted to ask something else, and he couldn't prevent himself. And so he said, but look at your hair. How can you be Italian? Obviously, he said hair, but in reality, maybe he meant also my skin tone, but I didn't have the courage to go so far. And I have to say that it was pretty, I thought, okay, he won, because with this question, really, what do I do? And so here, is when theories and experience come together. So when I read Frantz Fanon, The White Look, that was very revealing to me because I could see how this white look, since I was a child, was always on me. So my body was always exposed, always hyper visible, and sometimes invisible. So sometimes I was the only Black person in a room and I could hear all these white looks on me. And sometimes I was invisible. So I was treated differently if there were white people in front of me in a queue, for example, or behind me in a queue. And so Fanon was really an important reading for me. Also, and I'm writing about it now, actually, for an article I have to submit a bit late. I'm thinking about this missing history, and so I started to feel I was in a sort of in a state of epistemological discomfort. What does it mean? That I started to wonder why I know what I know, but why I don't know certain things, certain knowledges, certain experiences that I should know because are part of myself, of my family. Why I don't see myself represented in what I study. And I noticed that there was a missing link in my formation, that was colonialism, Italian colonialism. So my family history originated from that time, but it was like if at home I was part of a living archive where my grandmothers, for example, were telling me stories. My paternal grandmother, for example, she was born by an Ethiopian mother and an Italian father who did not recognize her. And so she was put into a sort of orphanage for mixed-race children in Somalia. My grandmother was Eritrean. My grandfather was a communist from Forlì, who escaped Italy and went to Africa. My great-grandfather was one of the first Italian settlers in Somalia. So I had all these experiences and these stories, but I could not read them because at school we didn't study Italian colonialism. Italian colonialism is seen as a sort of very short period of our history, not important. Italians didn't earn much. In fact, it's also called colonialismo straccione. Like, we built streets, we built hospitals, we brought civilization, but unlike the British or the French, who were good colonizers, Italiani, brava gente, good-hearted people. And you think that this myth is old, but in reality it's alive. So maybe we will think about it later. Obviously, the work of Angelo Del Boca was really important. So I don't know if you are familiar with his books, but he was basically the first one who started to provide a counter-narrative to this. He went into the archives, although it was very difficult, and he found out that actually Italians committed a lot of war crimes. Italians killed thousands and thousands of people. An example, Rodolfo Graziani. Rodolfo Graziani was, he basically committed a genocide in Libya, because Italy also had Libya in 1911. And when he went to Ethiopia, he was the governor of Ethiopia, when Ethiopian fighters tried to kill him, the retaliation was inconceivable. For 3 days, Italians were going around the streets of Addis Ababa killing everyone. Women, children, seals, anyone. They also went to monasteries because they thought that the fighters would hide in the monasteries, and they killed thousands of people. But we didn't know anything about this. Also, Italians used chemical warfare, and this was denied. So you may be familiar with this other name, Indro Montanelli. Montanelli, considered the father of Italian journalism. You have horrible statue in Giardini Porta Venezia here in Milan that are called Giardini Indro Montanelli, but we also should challenge the language. So we can call them Giardini Porta Venezia. That is actually the Habesha and queer neighborhood in Milan, right? So many Eritreans, Ethiopians live there.
By the way, as always, have been called before they come
before they change,
they
right?
continue to be Giardini.
Esatto, Porta Venezia. The statue is from 2012.
Yeah, 12. Yeah,
or maybe 8. Yeah. So it's very recent, unnecessary, pretty ugly, in my own personal opinion. But what does it mean? So we'll talk about this also later. And so Indro Montanelli was the one that was actually defending Italians, saying I was there because it was a black shirt. He went to into Africa during the war with Ethiopia, and as you know, he married a child, a 12-year-old child, and he was very proud of his achievement and of his sexual relationships with her, and so he was the one saying no, it's not true. So Angelo Del Boca was really alone for one time, providing these counter-narratives and this counter-archive that finally in the 1980s was acknowledged that Italians committed crimes. Also, at the end of World War II, Ethiopia, Greece and former Yugoslavia, they put a list of 1,200 war criminals, Italian war criminals, that they wanted to go to trial. including Graziani. But this didn't happen. So in Italy, we didn't have Nuremberg. Those who were fascists until 1943, when they switched side, then they were put into power. And so we had the same fascist in power. And also for a number of reasons, at the end of the war, the US and the UK tried to slow down the trials because they were very scared that the anti-communist front would collapse. Because Italy was too critical, too reflexive. And so, as you can see, it's very complex, but for a number of reasons, there is this missing history. And so, still today, when you study colonialism, even if in the course of modern history at the university, if you want to study Italian colonialism, very often you have to take a module in history of Africa to study Italian colonialism. So this tells you, right, how colonialism is not an amnesia, it's just selectively remembered. So I think this is important, not an amnesia, we haven't forgotten about it, you cannot forget about it. Look in Milan, wherever you look, train station, I was in Triennale a few days ago, with this huge fascio Vittorio, right? So fascism, the symbol, is there, and we cannot knock down every single building that has a fascist sign, but we can think about it, we can be critical about it, but this is very difficult. So, for example, if you go to Rome, I don't know if you've been near Roma Nord, near the Stadio Olimpico, there is an obelisk, very big obelisk, where it's written, with it's carved in the marble, Dux Mussolini. And this was made to celebrate the 10 years of the fascist regime. Now, imagine going to Berlin and having an obelisk that says Heil Hitler. Impossible, right? We cannot even imagine it. It would be the same. But if you go to Rome, you see this, and there is absolutely anything telling you what is that thing. And so when I was teaching in Florence before Canada, I was working at NYU, I was taking the students there every semester, and I was sending them around, interviewing people, because there is a stadio, so when there is a match, many people are there, but also there are some branches of the university, and so students sit there, have a sandwich. And so when my students were going around asking people, do you know what is this monument? Usually we have three sorts of responses. One was, yeah, I know, but it doesn't bother me because it's the past. It's not part of us anymore, so it can stay, I don't care. Another response was, no, I don't know. And the writing is huge. So also this tells something. And then there was a third set of responses that was, yeah, I know what it is, and I missed that time. So there was also the openly fascist nostalgia being told to us. So, missing history. How do we study history? What do we study? Why we don't study certain things? And so again, it's epistemological discomfort. I was wondering, where is my history? And so, for a number of reasons, I found through academia a way to interrogate myself and also trying to gather certain histories that I couldn't see in the books, but they were part of me. Also, grazie. Thinking about identity. So, as you know, in Italy, citizenship, so normality, is inherited by blood, ius sanguinis. I have ius sanguinis, I have this Italian blood, and you can see it's not just blood, it's something more, and that's why we start to talk a bit about race. These are banners from 2018. So 2018 was a very difficult year in Italy. In March, we had elections, and for the first time in Europe, two populist parties went to power. So, Cinque Stelle movement and Lega. First time in Europe, two populist parties. In 2017, there was the left-wing Democratic Party was trying to give us the illusion that they would fight for ius soli, so the right of soli. It doesn't matter where your parents are from. If you are born in Italy, you should be Italian. Ius sanguinis, no. You can be born anywhere. If one of your parents is Italian, you have this Italian blood being transmitted to you generationally, and so you can claim citizenship. And so this ius soli in every electoral campaign is used strategically by the left, getting more votes, we will fight for your rights, and by the right, absolutely not. So here you can see 2018 was still the Trump influence, and so you can see one of the banners was "Make Italy Africa Again." So if we have a ius soli, well, what happens? There was this senator, La Russa, proper fascist, coming from a fascist family, belonging to this party, Fratelli d'Italia, that I think at the next election will be very big, so we have to be prepared. He was going around TV programs saying this: Italy will become the delivery room of Africa if we promote this law, which is actually not true, because if you read the law, it's not so easy. It's not that you just arrive, you're pregnant, and that's it's not at all. But it was all propaganda. So l'Italia diventerà la sala parte dell'Africa, or you can see l'Italia a chi la ama. Also, in Parliament, we actually had fights. In July 2017, there were fights in the Parliament because it was so heated the debate. And this other senator from Lega saying, la cittadinanza non si regala, citizenship is not a gift. We cannot just give it like this to all these black bodies who want to become Italians. And then there was this one. This one was my favorite, into quotation mark, right? So this one is incredibly direct. So we can see a pregnant woman, white, married, and two arrows pointing at the belly, saying the gender, Italiana, Italiano, semplice, no? Easy, isn't it? Because that is the only way to be Italian, coming out of that womb, and that's a white, heteronormative body. And we know that we reproduce the nation, literally. So historically, women's sexuality has been controlled. And also, women's sexual reproductive abilities are controlled. Let's think what's happening now in the US. But all the abortion laws, who is deciding this? Men. So we have a strong control on our body imposed by men, and we can see here. So we actually are the boundaries of the nation. Also, 2018. 2018, as I said, it starts in a very already there was a bad start. The 15th of January, the governor of Lombardia, Attilio Fontana, who at the time was not governor, was candidate to become a governor. 15th of January, speaking about refugees and asylum seekers, he said something particularly striking, because 2018 was also the 80th anniversary of the racial laws. 1938, we had racial laws in Italy. And so the 15th of January 2018, Attilio Fontana says we cannot welcome them all, because if we do, our white race would be in danger. So after 80 years, he put the word white race together. A month later, February 3rd, 2018, we have Macerata. So Macerata was a terrorist attack, white terrorist attack, when Luca Traini, in order to avenge the murder of a young woman who was killed apparently by a Nigerian dealer, he took his gun, goes to Macerata, which is a city in the center of Italy, and he starts shooting any black person he sees around. Now it's interesting because the media said that obviously psychologically unstable, difficult childhood, drug addiction. Nobody mentioned racism because, according to the media, he killed foreigners, stranieri, but he didn't shoot French or Polish, Finnish, yeah. He shot black people. And so this was quite, this was quite scary in a way, because I was thinking, what about if I was there? My Italian blood, my Italian passport doesn't count. A month later, I was living in Florence, and another black man is killed, shot. Again, this relationship with weapons was really disturbing. This was Edidien. He was a Senegalese citizen. He had been living in Florence for 20 years. He was 54, and he was selling merchandise on the street. So everyone knew him in the area. And so he was crossing this bridge, the bridge Amerigo Vespucci, that connects you also to the American consulate. And the killer was this Italian man, Roberto Pirrone, who had some family issues and he wanted to kill himself, but then he can't do it. And so he said, I wanted to go out, commit a crime so they could arrest me. And he said, I shot the first person who was in my view, on my side. However, CCTV camera showed that when he was there, many people passed and they were white. And the only dead body was the body of a black man. Then we had the election, March. So the party, especially Lega, won also after a year of racist propaganda, especially anti-black. And then and then in June, we have another shooting, Soumaïla Sakho. So you can see how, for Black people and people of color, 2018 was really traumatizing year. Soumaïla Sakho, he was 29, he was from Mali, he was a trade unionist and an activist. He was working in Calabria, picking veg and fruit, exploited, slavery. But he was also fighting for the rights of agricultural laborer. And so one day, 2nd of June, he went into this abandoned factory to pick up some pieces of iron to have some friends to build a shop and they get to where they were living. And a person who was sat in the car, who illegally took possession of his land, see him and shot him. And so this is also my country. The country was living in 2018. And so obviously the questions that I was telling you were even more prominent in that year. So this was just to give you a context. What I would like to think in these few hours we have are also some questions. So what does it mean to be Italian? Who is the real Italian? Ius sanguinis? And this question, how are we, each of us, implicated in discourses of racial difference? So I would like to start delving a bit on this. And so if we go to the next slide, I have this exercise for you. So I would like you to think about the term racialization. It doesn't matter if you don't know what it means, we'll find out. It's really an exercise to try to figure out what it can mean. So the exercise is, do you consider yourself a racialized subject? And to this you can give the meaning that you feel. If no, why? Why you are not racialized? If is yes, when did you start thinking of yourself that way? Is there any epiphany or an episode or a consideration? When did you realize that we live in a world where race matters, where there is this thing, race? So you consider yourself racialized, yes or no? When did you understand that is race? So let's take a few minutes. As I said, if you don't know the meaning, it's totally fine. Just try to figure it out, and then we will find out together. Okay? I don't know if the people online also would like to do the exercise, and then we can also listen to you.
Yeah, sure.
If you want to work together, it's fine, yeah? If you want, or if you prefer to, maybe if you want to write down.
Just wanted to say something for the exercise. Thank you for your suggestion. That something happened to me recently. I was since ascoltiamo. No, just an anecdote. Like you were saying that history of, you have to, if you want to study colonialism, you have to study history of Africa. So I studied anthropology and I studied history of Africa, but then I tried to sign up for the list to teach, for the national exam to teach in Italy, in high school. And history of Africa is like in another disciplinary sector than history. So it does not count to teach history. Like, you know, that this kind of compartmentalization of like different disciplines.
Yeah.
It's like as called, scienze politiche, and not as so, which is history. So it did not count
As history.
to become like a history teacher.
Wow.
This was
That's interesting.
So you can teach political science.
no, of course not.
So let's take a few minutes to do that, yeah?
Working pair, do we work in pair?
Yeah, sure. Work in pair, and also because we didn't introduce each other. When you share, can you introduce yourself and tell me who you are, and why you're in this room today? Why if you have, I don't know, also this class? No. Oh, okay. You can introduce yourself. Okay, so here we have a new element that Chiara put into the picture, which is gender. So it's interesting how we are adding, starting from maybe what we see just color, there are other elements that compose this idea of race, mobility, gender, class. And that's interesting. When I went to Eritrea, for example, to do my field work in East Africa, I was called white. I was called a white woman. So I remember once I was with my cousin, and a friend of her talked to her, and I don't understand Tigrinya, so I asked, what did she say? And she laughed and said, oh, she was asking me, who is this white woman? And I was, what? Excuse me? And then I realized that I'm white, despite I'm not white. So there is a difference between race and color. So we can see that. What's the difference, you think, between race and color? In this case,
it's a construction. I mean, race is a complex of aspects that some give some meaning to a complex of aspects, while color is something you perceive or not. It's really more similar, it's more direct.
Okay, okay, so race is more complex and color is more perceivable. Okay, one else?
Yeah, I would like to say something. In this case, I think this woman, she was just judging you according not to your color, like real color, but according to another characteristics.
Which
like
was?
from you are coming from, and things like that. Maybe the way you were dealing with, and she just but
According to my economic thought, because I was coming from Europe, I was Italian, so it means economic power. And then it whitened me.
Yes.
So color is related to class and to your economic status. So think about Italians or Irish. Whiter than Irish is difficult to find. Irish are usually extremely white complexion. When they go to Louisiana with the Italians, they're called the N-word, white blacks. And you think, how is it possible they're called blacks? Well, it's because they were living with African Americans, picking strawberries. So they were black socially.
Yes.
But then what happens? Race came into the picture. So because they were white, they started to get rights. The rights to vote, the right to move from the neighborhood, the right to move from the plantation and going into the city. And so whiteness pulled them up socially. So African Americans were still there picking strawberries, Italian and Irish became judges, police officers. So this is also the main difference, that color is social. And so it's not really color. There are some black people who are whiter than some white people because they have a higher economic capital. But then there is always white privilege that come in the end. So I can be a billionaire, but then when I go, I don't know, walking at the platform in Milano Centrale, maybe I am asked for an ID and not widow. So we see race and color. So I think this is important. And so gender, we're not only racialized, we're also gendered. Okay, thank you, Chiara.
I'm Laura. With the department and do research on education, and I'm interested in this seminar because of intersectionality and how adult people learn who am I in relation to the context to the others. So I'm really very interested in this kind of processes. And my epiphanies I thought are two. One was in the United States when a colleague, a psychologist from the United States, constructed me as a colored person. So I never thought of me as not white. She said, you are colored because you have an accent. And from the accent, she reconstructed that I was Italian, and Italians are Latinos. So that was her explanation. And I was fascinated about that. And that was interesting because I started, it was 2014. Starting to think of myself, okay, as you said, it's not only the race of the others, how you are constructed having a race. And then the year after, I was in South Korea, and I went to a public bath. And when I entered naked in 100, maybe more women, all ages, all Asian, I said, oh my God, everybody's looking at me. It was interesting, but I became paranoid.
Yeah.
So, my body was so different from all the others. So that was maybe more like a self-perception. I don't know if they were struck about my diversity. I felt diverse.
So that's the feeling of being a minority. And some of us are always a minority. So this is very interesting. See, when I was in Eritrea, I was shocked. Because for the first time, I saw people looking like me. And I never had that experience before, because I'm a minority. And so this idea, right, when you are the norm, obviously, when we talk about normality, whiteness is invisible only for those who inhabit whiteness, but it's very visible to others. And so it's very interesting and shocking when you experience, when you go outside of this comfort zone, and suddenly you are the minority. You are the only one. Mm? So that's
exactly it happened to me. Then I became aware. I was called the pronoun as a child by my relatives because I am not from the north, but my face, my skin is a bit more, and I feel that I'm more Mediterranean. So if I go to Turkey, many people treat me as a third person. So I know that also in Europe we can be racialized.
Exactly. So this is another important point. We see every person at the piece of this puzzle. Everyone is racialized. Everyone. Each of us in this room, whenever we step outside in the world, we are looked in a certain way. Obviously, certain features have been given a meaning, and we will see how. But everyone is racialized. So Italians are particularly interesting because Italians have to fight to be considered white. They were not white. So we will see when the theories of Cesare Lombroso traveled to the other side of the ocean, Sicilians, where they were not white, they were considered Sicilians. So they had a polluted blood mixed with Arab blood because Sicily was an emirate. And so there was this connection.
Even recently, I read somewhere that I think in Canada, there was some institutional differentiation between Italian and Italian from South of Italy.
Exactly.
Something that they really had
yeah.
recently.
And you see, when we think about why it's so important to study this history, because it really helps us to see the influence of 1800s scientific racist theories today. We will go into that society later if we have time, and you can see how these pseudo theories, they were coined, were invented really in the 1800s, are still very well alive today. And so by knowing this story, then we are able to explain and to translate this into the present. So again, accent, yeah, suddenly, immediately makes you feel a foreigner. And Italians not being white, where does it come from? It comes from the 1800s, when Italians leave Italy. So between 1870 and 1916, 14 million Italians live out of 38 million living in the country. So imagine half of the country just live because of poverty. And when they arrive, they are racialized body. They are poor, sometimes they are dark, sometimes they have curly hair, all features attributed to Black people who were of the lower bottom of the pyramid, right? And so there is this connection between Italians and Blacks, especially Sicilians. The North were still okay because they were part of the Aryan family. So, but the South, absolutely not. And so these racial categories, how they're flexible, how they change. Okay.
I was a student here in the Department of Education. And before I used to work as I would like to first to the complex in my country. Actually, it's not so clear, specifically related to the person. It's not so obvious to notice it. Maybe we have something else like categorizing people from city, village, camps. Because in Palestine, we have internal refugees. So, yes, I can't be with so important for people to ask you from and maybe we can even deal with you according to this. Even for me, now I'm realizing maybe unconsciously, it's why I'm not like behaving with people according to this, but it's even for me, I'm asking these questions. This was so normal for us.
In Palestine, not here.
In Palestine.
Okay.
Yes. But here, I was doing my career that here till now I did not experience any event to like that really I think it is so related to the system. And actually I was preparing myself to such an event, but never. No.
Just wait.
I'm not going to How long have you been here for? Oh, wow, okay, so a long time.
She was good. I'm saying maybe to go further than but I was considering myself. I like it best. But yeah, I was happy. I was hearing my colleagues, that they were the main leaders who have it with you, so maybe having this way in such events and nothing.
But it's interesting that obviously, again, not this privilege that some people don't think about it, like while sometimes you have to prepare yourself, okay, maybe I will experience this, maybe I will experience, as women, right?
Yes.
We don't feel, when we go to certain places at a certain time, we're not relaxed, right? We are on guard because we don't feel that we're safe 100%. And as racialized people, you know that if you go to certain spaces, well, probably you're going to be the only non-white person in the room, so you start to prepare yourself. But then there are people who don't think about it. That it's totally normal to enter in space and feel the norm, being the norm. So also this privilege, Sartre called this the privilege of see without being seen. Very interesting. And Palestine is so interesting. When I went to Palestine, actually, I was amazed by the diversity of skin tone and features. One of my friends, I think he was.
Even the accent, sorry.
The accent, yeah. I think he was red hair and green eyes, right? So Crusaders probably, and they went to Palestine. So it's so diverse, and it's very, it's very interesting.
Angelica, I was very surprised when I listened to her saying that she never experienced radicalization as a Palestinian. I mean, me as a worker going to Palestine since a very long time, I always consider the Palestinian as radicalized by definition, of course, because of the Israeli domination. So you cannot move freely from a village to another village in year-round territory. You have to justify the fact that you are doing things because of the checkpoints. You cannot travel easily. You have to ask for special permits. I think your passport is approximately, which is quite a joke. It will allow you to travel just because of special permits. So I think these are, by definition, in my opinion, and that let me ask you, it's quite it's your normality. So you even don't consider that as a sort of discrimination.
It's normal. This is, yes, so this is discrimination for sure. I'm so worried about this. I was expressing my not
Ich bin hören.
to my friends. It's not so
Would you?
Would
you? Would you?
Just to my just to travel. I have to hold my ID always whenever I work inside Palestine. So yeah, this is something so aware to it, but I mean specifically here in Italy. Yes. I'm talking about my experience here.
Here in Italy.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Maybe things have changed in Italy.
Maybe Italy, yeah, but you believe it. No, I'm here for,
Yeah, can you imagine how did you find here at Paradise? Compared to what you're experiencing in your country? Yeah.
But it's interesting the role of religion, right? Because when it was when I went to Palestine, I was in Italy, and so there is this area where Palestinians cannot go.
yes.
Hebron.
Yes.
Yes. And so there is this group called Break the Silence, where former Israeli soldiers decided to stop and to fight for against the occupation. And because they have the right to go inside this prohibited area, they bring tourists. And so it's really interesting. So when we went there, we were at this checkpoint. This area is extremely, you can smell it in the air, the tension there is. You see Israeli settlers with guns going around, right? And so when we entered this, we were particularly surveilled, and I was the only brown person among this group of white tourists. And there, the soldier, an Israeli soldier, looking at me, just at me, it would say, "Is there any Muslim person here?" Looking at me, right? And I was not responding, so I was just smiling because I wanted to see where this could go. And so racial profiling based on religious assumptions. So also race is connected to religion. Yes. So is another element. You want to intervene now?
Yes.
Yeah. Go on.
Yeah, I wanted to say that race may be related to religion, to language, and to nationality, specifically nationalities kind of are part of race. But for me, in Iran, there is a lot of diversity in culture and race because we are mostly from the same race, and also just the conflict is between being Aryan, we say that Russian people are Aryan, in Germany, but they know themselves from an Aryan race. And in some other countries, I got heard that they know themselves from the same race. Anyway, no diversity in Iran. I never faced with that. And mostly migrant people that come to Iran are from Afghanistan because after war, a lot of Afghanistan people came to Iran.
As a refugee?
Yes, yeah, as a refugee, mostly as a refugee, because they have the same kind of the same language as a Farsi section. Yeah, so Iran is a good choice for them, and it's so close. And they know in Iran no diversity, but it is interesting. My experience may be interesting for you. When I came here, I started to hear, I found some friends and I started to go around to see Italy and different places. Yeah, and my first experience with being racism, something like this, with myself, because all the time my friends were telling me, that is, you are a racist person. You are a racist person. Yeah. I was surprised why, but because I didn't know who is a racist person actually. But I heard it from my friends whenever I wanted. For me, everything was new. For example, when I wanted to talk about people, they said, "No, you are racist." Oh my God, how? So even about some habits of Italian people, habits of people from other countries. When I was talking, they said that you are a racist in all aspects. I don't know, maybe when I talked about the color of people, talked about some religion, some habits, they said, no, it seems that Iranian also are kind of racist. And when my first experience when they said, yeah. But for me was, I said, no, it's not because of racism.
I just feel this is new for me, really interesting. It's not the same no. Anyway, yeah, it was something that my friends tell me, yet still they tell me that you are racist, like other example. Yes. I think we're not something. I remember Dana also Dana this one example because Dana is one of those friends. But it was we were talking about the we went to a black yes, one of these. Yeah. And when I came, I live indoor, and I found that I was familiar with a black girl in our door. And she told me, she said, but one night we were talking, one time, she said, oh, I'm going to marry. I said, oh, so good, when? I said, the next month, for example. I said, very good. You don't know who is my husband? I said, no. I said, this, he was a white guy in our door. What's wrong? Okay, well, it was so difficult to not show any reaction because that I was completely white and my friend was black. So, because in Iran, based on my culture, it is something that I can say, oh. So for me, it was maybe the first thing that was so clear. I said, oh. Then I came to my friend, I tried to not show that I'm kind of, I talked about it. I said, do you know who is, for example, that girl? They said, yes, this. They said, you are racist. They didn't say anything, but they said, they found that I'm kind of surprised.
Your body language.
And we was, and we defined race in different aspects as Professor Borretti. Each of us have our construction of this. I know after I started to interview my students from different countries, and the first thing that they told me that Italians are racist. I asked them how they informed that because they cannot have a relationship with foreigners, so they are racist. Always for me was a question: how can we say they are racist because they can't speak English well, or they don't like to have a close relationship with foreigners? For me, was a question, still is a question, but I'm not sure that these things that students tell about being racism of Italian is true or not. I need more clear things, behavior, or something that show, for example, anyway, it was a conflict for me in case of myself. I am still thinking, am I racist really or not? But because I had another experience with that was one of the participants told me that I was doing the interview. He told me that even it's include gender as well. So, he told me I was talking about men and women and like this. He said that after some minutes, he said that I am not. I was like, okay, because you are going. Boys that don't like to talk about, talk a lot, something like this, some stereotype. He said because I was trying to get a kind of familiarity that he speak in a comfortable way. After some minutes, he said, okay. I found that he was standing me and not what didn't like to say, but he didn't have any other choice. Finally, he said, okay, but I'm not a boy, I'm a girl. I'm a non-conformity gender. So at that time, again, it was a pressure. Okay. I have the audio of this interview. I listened to it many times because at that time I was shy. I'm sure that the color of my skin changed. And what I wanted to show that, oh, it's okay, for me it's normal, but actually, no, it's not normal. I'm Iranian, yeah, it's not normal because, in Iran, you are not allowed to say that. I feel that I am not from this normal gender.
I think it is good that you can question yourself about it. Right?
Yes, I am thinking, yes.
And these experiences are clearly shocking you, but also make you question how maybe certain parts of your culture are problematic for other people, right? And in Italy it's the same, right? When you say to someone, you're racist, people are, what? How? This was, so there is this defensiveness. So I think it's really good that you actually think about yourself.
Yes.
And
actually, I am thinking about things based on my experience and things that I hear from students that they say Italian are racist, and my friends that say I am racist. So I am that's really honestly, I am thinking that how I am and how Italian are, because I don't have any clear certificate that I am racist and Italian are how they are racist. I never.
I can say that they are racist.
Yes, important. You know, I got familiar with Italian law. He told me that we talked for some time. He said that to be a friend with Italian girls. It was a kind of gender stereotype, said because Italian girls and women are all racist. So I said, just the girls and said yes.
just go.
Yes, Italian, and I said yes, because, you know, I said, how did you find that just women and the girls are in Italy are racist? I said, okay, because you can understand based on their behavior and how they behave with other people, with foreigners, with this, and then relate it to war in Ukraine and said, you know, and you don't follow the news of war, how they pay attention to white people in that are from Ukraine, but they don't pay attention to the other. I said, okay, so why Italian? It doesn't.
But I think it's also, what you're saying is also interesting because it makes us think even more how cultures, you know, are sort of constructions transmitted and passed on generationally. And it doesn't mean that we cannot challenge the culture we are from.
Yes.
So we've been told
Yeah.
think in a certain way, especially in terms of gender.
Yes, we need to know about all the chances, as said, a big combination of these. For example, maybe they are culturally, they are something called cultural issues, not just being racist or these things. In the case of racism and race and cultural studies that we are all working on, because my research also is mainly based on cultural diversity. So we have to know about all of the gender and the culture and the race. They are very close to each other. That we shouldn't make a kind of misunderstanding in these three fields.
Thank you. And what's your name?
Hadis.
Okay. So much. Okay. Who wants to go first? And put people on the chat.
Is there anybody?
Put someone speaking.
Yeah, maybe for somebody.
So if someone of you want to share, please feel free to raise your hand.
We can put.
And we can put you in loudspeaker.
Speaker and even.
In the meantime, who would like to share? Yeah.
Virginia.
Yes.
I study, right now I study physics, I'm a master's and your master's, but I want to change my course because I do feel like I want to study something else that makes me more happy and studying this.
Like cultural studies?
Yes. I'm very flying to the social sciences. So yes, I'm Brazilian.
Okay.
I'm Italian, actually. Yes, so my grandparents were Italian, so I ended up having citizenship. So yeah, my father got it when I was still, so he passed it to me to my sister. And I ended up 2 or 3 years later, after the passport, coming here to study. So being Brazilian, Brazilian woman in Italy, Europe in general is very, very weird because when you say, oh, I'm Brazilian, they always say, oh, Neymar, Ronaldinho, they're always saying things like this. But when it comes to women, they say, I'm sorry for words, but they say, oh, big butts. Oh, Brazilian women, they're like, oh, yes, Brazilian, they're dancers with this and that, samba. And they always think of, carnival and the dancers and everything. And the first comment they make is, oh, you don't look Brazilian. So I asked, so
Interesting.
what's the Brazilian look like? And they always say, oh, because I was expecting, you to have, maybe more of a shape in your body. Yes. And then, oh, but only this. And then they say, no, maybe your hair, you have, kind of blondish hair. You don't, and then you say, oh, skin color. And they say, Brazilian people are very mixed, And as I was telling them, white, but in my family, I have descendants, I have indigenous people, I have African people, and it was kind of washed away during the generations, but it's there in every Brazilian person. It's so hard to find someone that's 100% European. It is really impossible because during colonization, many indigenous women were captured and were raped and African women as well. So when you're talking about the Brazilian context, talking about race it's very difficult because even though people assume they're white, they are actually not. So in Brazil, I think race is absolutely, for them, in Brazil, race is absolutely linked to the skin color.
Yeah.
Because people there, and I think in most countries where there was this kind of mixed people, they feel entitled to belong to race, doesn't their color.
Yeah.
So I think there in Brazil, race and color yes,
It's super interesting. Actually, each person in this room could be Brazilian.
exactly.
It's incredible. So, and it's true that there is this racial and sexual stereotypes, particularly prominent for Brazilian women. One of my best friends is from São Paulo. She's like you, blonde, blue eyes, and she tells me when I say I look very white European, as soon as I say I'm Brazilian, she says you can see the switch in something. Oh, it's sexual fantasy, sexual colonial fantasy, right? Now, and so I guess looking like you, and obviously you disrupt this fantasy because people expect someone else, and so in a way you also have to experience a number of questions and prejudice and comments are very unpleasant because you don't represent what is considered the Brazilian woman, and which is totally constructive. So this is very interesting.
Adding also fun because I do speak Italian and I've been learning to speak Italian. But I learned to speak for real, like here, really. So I don't have a strong Brazilian accent. So when people talk to me, since I'm white, they don't expect me to have an accent. So the first thing they say, oh, you're Brazilian.
كارينا
No.
على البترون بليز تلفني لي لانه اوقات اذا اللوكيشن ما بعرف الجي بي اس بيعطي شيء محلات مش ظابطه.
Excuse me.
تلفني لي انا دليكي على الطريق. از فيري ايزي ما تعطي هم. اوكي.
People don't expect an accent from me. When I tell them Brazilian, they say, "Oh, now I can notice this."
Now,
Now I know those cracks.
yeah. So this is what Fanon. I don't know if you've read Fanon. Like, it's something I really recommend, especially Black Skin, White Masks. There is chapter 5 that I think is really mind blowing. And he speaks about there is this episode that he tells when he's on a train, and there is this French white kid that sees him, and in his body he sees being embodied. And he speaks about dissection. So to be dissected, right? You're sliced in order to know, especially racially ambiguous people experience this fragmentation and dissection because you know, what side of you belongs to that, what side of you belongs to these quarters, very often there are numbers used, also you are 1/4 of this, 3/4 that. And so this idea of dissection, I think, is really important. Is there someone from the
Is there anybody who wants to intervene from home? Do you have Karina from Lebanon? Just a second, I try to put you. I don't know why. Here I have a screen and there are another screen.
Let's see if you ask. No.
I'm
okay.
always saying my. Okay, Karina, you can share your experience, and let's see if I am able to make you visible even in the screen. I'm not sure.
Hello.
Yes,
hi, Karina.
Hi. So actually, what's funny? I'm sorry I couldn't hear everything because the sound is not clear. But I'd like to share something with you. What's funny is everyone who sees me, they think I'm a Napolitana, or if they can't guess, they think that they know and they say, "Oh, you're Latina." And they never think I might be Lebanese. So I'm a clinical psychologist, and I'm the safeguarding officer at Caritas Lebanon. And I work a lot with vulnerable population, and I can see a lot of racism and discrimination. And if I can give you the example of the national or local model in Lebanon, we have discrimination and we have racism among Lebanese population. So when someone sees you, the first thing they ask you, where are you from? To know which area, to know your religion, to know to which political party you belong, and what are your preferences, to try to see you from this lens. And they never see you from your humanity lens, which is very challenging in Lebanon. And we have a lot of experience of marriage with migrants. Mm-hmm. So for Lebanese people, it's like the end of the world if you're married with different type of migrants, because even with migrants we have we categorize migrants. So yes, at this level we have discrimination as well. So I just wanted to share this.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, and it's true there are
Thank you.
Degrees, right? Degrees.
Mm-hmm.
Degree. Eccola, ciao.
Oh,
I can see you now.
Oh, ciao. And I speak Italian as well.
There are degrees of acceptability of the other. So
correct.
Not just one other, we have several degrees of others. So in Italy, for example, in the 1990s, the other were Albanians. Albanians was, to say I'm Albanian was a huge stigma. And then others arrived, North Africa. So there have been the new others, West Africa, the new others. And now we have this new category that is called migrants, the migrants, immigranti. So when you say this word, obviously you imagine a black person. You don't imagine a white person, but still it's a word that we have somehow now is in use in the media and in common language. Immigranti, to identify people from sub-Saharan Africa coming by boat. And, so it's interesting how we associate certain identities to certain degree of otherness, and then they change. And often what happens, and you can see these first generation and third generations, I don't know if you've noticed that, but often first generation people, so our elderly family members, may be more intolerant and more racist towards new others because they're not that anymore and they don't want to be associated with that. And so you notice some kind of friction between grandparents and children. The children are the third generation, maybe they're in a multicultural school, but then maybe they can hear the Nana talking about those Africans arriving by boat, being dealers. You know, so these internalized stereotypes that first generation people sometimes may have. So it's really interesting what you were saying, Karine. Okay, shall we carry on with the
Thank you.
three people?
Yeah, I'm Rachel. I'm a supervisor, and I generally follow this good advice and really enjoyed the last speaker. And thanks for sharing. Yeah, I think probably the first time I noticed was through like making it overtly clear my privilege. Probably like having access to places that people don't have access to. I was invited to like in non-white countries, I was invited to influence in ways that locals were not invited to influence. Like speak on topics, even though I was less senior than other people in the country.
Mm-hmm.
So like
in what countries?
like the Philippines or India, or also in India, like being sexualized, because what I was explained was in the Bollywood films, they swap out for white people during the like sexual scenes. So there's like a lot of inappropriate advance, and people like wanted to take pictures of you with you, and when somebody said don't do that because they're telling people that you're their girlfriend, like all of those strange things like that. Or the only time I can strongly remember having it not, like having it flipped was in Vietnam, northern Vietnam. I was not permitted access. I was denied access. That was like the only time I can strongly remember being denied access.
Because you were white?
I never knew if it was because I was female, white, or American.
Access to what?
Just to an internet cafe.
Oh, okay.
They were open, there was lots of computers available, and they shut the door and locked it and said they were closed. But
Okay.
I mean, yeah, I went to the American War Museum in Vietnam, which for us is the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
I was like the only person under the age of 60 that wasn't Vietnamese. So
Okay.
just, yeah. Yes. So mostly I was experiencing privilege, or like traveling as a younger person and asking my parents, like being aware of my capital, even like my ability to travel, like the fact that I literally was traveling. And
yeah. Well, and obviously these testimonies are super important, you know, like people who are aware of their privilege and their invisibility and with the normal, somatic norms. So, and where do we go with that? What do we do with that, right? Because obviously, I think very often when I do this kind of classes or even training for people who are not in academia, I notice there is a lot of shame and guilt to talk about it, while I think that guilt is not productive. Inflicting guilt, you know, I don't think it's very productive. So I think it's very good that we can openly discuss, and obviously each of us in this room is privileged. The fact that we're sitting inside this institution is a massive privilege for each of us. But then intersectionality teaches how, well, what are the differences, what kind of power each of us has according to everything that you said. Stefania. I met Stefania in Bicocca a week ago for another lecture, right?
I'm not a scholar, I'm a journalist. But yeah, I feel like a minority in Italy among journalists. So
that would be the feeling.
Yeah, I think we have to try to be independent and feminist journalist. So, but I mean, I felt marginalized a bit in the US because I was sad when I was living for 3 months years ago, and I was sad that I was not really white because of my pronunciation.
Again, so the accent.
Yeah, yeah. So, and then usually, because I mostly work with other colleagues from European countries, mostly from Germans and Nordic countries. And I try, I apply for American friends. I have a feeling that they look at me with a kind of suspicious because I'm Italian. And because
of cheat.
Yeah, kind of. I have a feeling that they are always to prove somehow that I'm not I mean, it's interesting because I don't want to, I don't want to make a compare my privilege. And of course, I'm a privileged person, and because of my skin and etc. But I mean, I have to, for example, there is the idea that even when you can clean the box, you fill the boxes, there is not a Mediterranean person. There is Latin, like black. Yeah, but I mean, if you're Mediterranean, you're not perceived like an Anglo-Saxon person.
No.
So this is kind of something that I'm thinking about, because I mean, we are also from Italy, a G7 country, but at the same time, if you are a female and you're not from the mainstream environment, you have a lot of challenges, for example, for doing your job, even if you're precarious workers as I am. So, I mean, there is like a missing place for me somehow in the Western countries.
Yeah, and this actually is what points out how even within whiteness, there are several degrees of whiteness. There is white and white. So white Italian is different from white North American or white Swedish. It's very different from white German. So again, we're all racialized, even within the same group. So these degrees, and Italians are white Mediterranean in general, white Mediterranean are quite low. Greece, Spain, Portugal, Italy, they're liminal.
And they call us pigs, right?
Oh, yeah, there are some derogatory terms.
Yeah. But they don't go.
Yeah. There are derogatory terms that were connected also to the fact that Italians were daily laborers. And so there is this word that was very fancy, dego, because it was daily goers. So they were going every day picking fruit and veg in several places. And so they were called, this word became a sort of racial slur against Italians. And Italians were also lynched in the US. So the biggest lynch, where few people were killed, is about Italians. So in one go, they killed like 13 people. They lynched 13 Italians. It's considered the biggest single lynching event.
I can condemn myself because my epiphany was very recent, even if I had a certain episode that I cannot consider comparable to yours as an Italian world in the US. But then I discovered how much my name is recognized in the US. Do you know Guido name? And when yeah, you did
Guido, and they're like, really?
So surprising to me because when I was introducing myself to my colleagues in the US, and they said, "What's your name, Guido?" I always saw people smiling, looking at me, and then I said to my host, "What's going on?" And said, "Guido is a very, very, very rude name here in the US. And Guido is like to say." It's
like the image.
It's quite an insult. It's quite an insult. It's quite an insult. If somebody tells you Guido, it's like to say, yeah, you are
weird.
very rude.
Yeah, if you describe the kind of 1950s slick back hair, rolled up sleeves, young, sexy, just kind of players.
And then our friends of mine are very nice. He's like a compliment. The compliment is that. It's a communist Jewish, and he told me, yeah, but Guido, I thought that Italy was very common. When you speak here in the US about Guido, you have in mind that people working in the port, very huge people with a very big muscle,
very hairy,
muscle, and very dark. Macho man with something a little bit bad, you know, it's not just macho and sexy, but it's even quite vicious. So I discovered myself to be good really, in the US, which is an issue. Then it can be used.
So also believe can be part of your rap.
What did you say?
Yeah, there's nothing new in Italy then because of this TV show. So it's very recent. It's a justice show from MTV.
The justice.
Guido Beats, where we have two guys, yeah.
But it's like in the two, like
20 years.
Yeah,
2 years.
20.
I think it was like short. I didn't watch it. I thought it was in like the early 2000s.
And there is even the feminine name, the translation, which is not in Italy. You don't, I don't know really. But in Italy, I read that there is a Guido and a name that is a transformation of a feminine form of Guido, who is representing the same stereotype. That's really bad.
But also, this is interesting how maybe racialized people or people who perceive certain stereotypes attached to them, well, they can also use them strategically to improve their life conditions. So think about Jersey Shore. How much money people do to do that role, which they know is a caricature, but is to play with the game, to play the game, the racial game, the stereotype. And so, you know, sometimes when you see, I don't know, very offensive adverts, like recently, and there was this horrible adverts on Instagram. This Italian woman was a line of makeup. And so she did this advert about mascara, black, and the slogan was something super sexual connected to this myth of genitalia, African men. So it was super offensive, and the song was really bad. And behind her, there were a number of black dancers dancing here. And so people were saying, but why they do that? Why do they accept to play in that advert knowing that it's so racist? Well, sometimes maybe you need to pay the rent. They offer you money to play that role, you take it. Although you know that is offensive, that is racist. So it's also interesting how not to judge in sort of clear-cut positions. There is a lot of gray areas that I think is the really interesting part for us, the contradictions. How can you do that but do this?
Clearly meaning that I have to be much more leader in my
we can leave the winner. I mean, who reads?
Maybe you can publish an article how I discovered to be Guido.
Our technology.
And we have
Darasini from Nigeria. Darasini from Nigeria, and I'm here because my supervisor has been put because my thesis is with asylum seekers and refugees. And so there's usually discourse on racism from the material from the refugees. And actually, she went a chapter I was writing something about critical theory, and she felt so this 7 maybe people learn some that's what I mean. So I wanted to come because I always like some challenges, right? I wanted to come. So being racialized for me is many layers. From Nigeria, from close colonized by Britain. So right from growing up, already it was already presented that the white person was superior to the black person. language from. So, for example, English is compulsory in schools. You can't. Now English is the first language of many children in Nigeria another one. They can't speak the mother tongue. So it's so from that level, you really see the white person as up there. It's been rooted in the mentality. And then when we see things also on TV, for example, in sports, when we see people like Balotelli plays for Italy and feel it's being appreciated, it's being discontinued. When we hear reports of black players being wounded, being monkey chants being made of them, we already received that. So in Nigeria, the field in the most racist countries in Europe are Germany and Italy because of football. because of what they see being done to black footballers. So that's a mentality. So when people heard eventually Italy, they're racist in that country. In 2016, I was in Germany and people were surprised, asked if I had racist experiences. No, I didn't. In 2018, 2017, 2019, I was also in Germany. I really didn't have that experience with it because I spent short periods, 7 months, 6 months, came back. So now I think I feel realized always friendly levels. I mean, it's different levels for one, so when I do passports, each time I'm coming from the UK or from Nigeria, I have to stay on the queue for times 2 hours. But people from some who carries the passports, they also have to face in the streets and the gates. And I tell myself, if there's any reason I want to get a European passport, so I would stay on this queue. It's time to stay on the queue. Why should I stay on the queue? So each time I'm reminded, each time I travel, I'm reminded of that. I don't know, there are too many. In this university, I was in a toilet one day, and somebody I assume was a professor entered the toilet shop to see me and went back. In the university, so this happens. I've been sitting somewhere in the PhD room, and a woman saw me enter, so she noted that and said, someone told me to come around here for a technician, and I said, it's the next office, not this office. But I felt, okay, so a black student can be a PhD student, that I stayed here today again. On one day, usually from the residence to the university, there's a school bus that carries us. So this week, the driver was changed. So students were entering the bus, and I was entering the bus, and the driver said, asking the client, where are you going? And I said, in English, to the university. I just said, okay. So then I said that. So almost on a daily basis, it's there, but for me, I feel racism is not going away. I come to that conclusion, so I've made my peace with it. But when I encounter it, it's due to the ignorance of another person. So that's how I deal with it when it comes.
Yeah, and also this is interesting because as there are several degrees of whiteness, there are also several degrees of blackness. And in Italy, for example, there's black and black. So if you are black from the US, it's different from being black from Mali. So black from the US, again, money. So as soon as you open your mouth and speak English, usually the interaction completely changes because there is this assumption. But obviously, if you're saying black from West-Saharan Africa, for example, doesn't speak English, arrived in Italy in other ways that it's not a plane, there's another. So you see how racialization is really everywhere. It's really everywhere. So yes, absolutely.
No, era
Abbiamo
no,
un po' di tempo. Io te l'ho detto che sta lezione dopo fare il show because this is what I like, you know, that we can take the time to have conversations because it's very rare at the time. There's always this lot of theories. So I have like 56 slides here. But I think this kind of interaction is much more worth to understand. So when phenomena. But
you need to share again.
yeah. So let's define this racialization. Beautiful. Yes.
So thank you so much.
Thank you for your participation. So racialization.
Is it from here?
Actually, this slide is not there. I will read it. Okay. In my laptop. Okay, so I will put it here because it's not there. Not from the beginning, from current slide. Allora, I'm going to read it first, and then I will show it to you so the people online can understand. So, racialization, a dialectical process, by which meaning is attributed to a particular biological feature of human beings. So, a process by which meaning is attributed to a particular biological feature of human beings, as a result of which individual may be assigned to a general category of person which reproduces itself biologically. So, a process by which meaning is attributed to a particular feature, as a result of which individuals are assigned a certain category, and this category reproduces itself. The process of racialization of human beings entails the racialization of the processes in which they participate and the structures and institutions. So, what does it mean? Our body, in theory, organic material. But at some point in history, to a blue eye has been attributed a meaning. To blonde hair has been attributed a meaning. And starting from there, it's not just a meaning, it's also certain values. So this is when racialization started. So when we started to use the body, not anymore just as both skin, but as cultural body. So having a certain skin tone has been attributed to a certain meaning. And this was constructed by racial classification. So a good starting point can be 1492. What happens in 1492? Well, very often in history books you still read the discovery of America. So the Americas already existed, were not discovered, people were living there, culture that were even much more developed than European cultures, right? But there was a difference in terms of technology. And so Canada, where I live now, was called Turtle Island. Genocide, US, same. Central, South America, similar. So, but why is it important this discovery of America? Well, it's because when Europeans go there, they discover a different humanity. So imagine that obviously what was considered the boundary at the end of the world was the Mediterranean. So if you see ancient maps, you see that besides England and Portugal, where there were monsters in the maps, right, these hydra, sort of 3 heads, huge monsters, because this is what people thought, that if you go beyond a certain level, you don't know where you're going. So Columbus obviously was very brave. That's why nobody wanted to finance his trip, because people were saying, you're crazy, where do you go? There's nothing there. Unfortunately, someone financed his trip, and Europeans arrived. Columbus is interesting because if you read his diaries, he was saying, talking about Minos in Cuba, for example, he was saying, well, these people don't know how to speak. We need to teach them. Because already it was brought with this European background. But what is really interesting, if you go to the slide, if you carry on, is the idea of identity. So how identity becomes fundamental. And Stuart Hall tells us why. Sorry to carry on. Yeah, we skip all of this. It isn't fine. Okay, here, identities. So he said something really important. He said identities are the product of the marking of difference and exclusion, and not the inclusion. So I am who I am because I'm not like you. This is what gives me identity. And so he says, identities are more the products of the marking of difference and exclusion than they are the sign of an identical, naturally constituted unity. Identities are constructed through this entails the radically disturbing recognition that it is only through the relation to the other, the relation to what the other is not, what the other lacks, that we can construct identity. So it's like if we need the other to define who we are. And this is what happened with the colonization of the Americas. Who are these people? And how can we exploit them? How can we make them work for free? How can we take their properties and their possession if they're like us? We need to find a way to justify slavery. And so here, racialization comes in the picture. So you can see that race was invented to justify racism.
الو ايه شو وين صرتي؟ قطعت الجيش؟
Sorry, can you mute your microphone, please?
ضل بكفايه ما تفوتي على البترون.
Okay, yeah, we can leave that. So you see how identity becomes the marker of identification, and how in European culture, for example, there are authors that are so important in our culture that we study, like philosophers and scientists, they were extremely racist, but we don't know that. An example, if you go to the next slide, Guido, please, is Voltaire. Voltaire, we all studied Voltaire. Well, in 1733, he says something very powerful, talking about Africans. He said, their eyes are not like ours. The black ball on their heads and other parts has no resemblance to our hair. And it may be said that if their understanding is not of a different nature from ours, it's greatly inferior. They are not capable of any great application or association of ideas, and seem to fall neither from their advantages nor abuses of philosophy. So philosophy is no point. The Negro race is a species of man as different from ours as the breed of spaniels is from greyhounds. And that is interesting because it's 1733, so the development of anatomical sciences. And so he doesn't stop on the outside. He goes inside and he said the mucous membrane or network which nature has spread between the muscles and the skin is white in us and black or copper color in them. So again, you see how every part of the body has a meaning, has a value, inferior, not capable, not developed. And so in the racial classification, so when we start to classify races, well, we do this precisely. So if you go to the next slide, here we go. You may be familiar with this. So we are in 1853. The Gobineau. De Gobineau actually was kind of obsessed a bit with Italy, and he was seeing Italians, precisely Southern Italian. Well, he recognized that the Roman Empire has been a great empire, but said it collapsed because the Romans got too mixed. So their blood got too polluted, and that's why they collapsed. Northern Italians were still fine, but Southern Italians, no chance. And so here is when we literally invent races and colors. So in this essay he wrote, an essay on the inequality of the human races, he talks about higher races and lower races, and he used color, white, yellow, negroid, and also it's interesting because in other categorization, white people are called Caucasian. So we use places and that define the entire race. So some point. So yeah, so that's that's interesting because Ethiopia were considered one of the classification was Ethiopian, Mongolian, Caucasian. So they were taking geographical places and attributed to that place an entire race. But Caucasian, so the Caucasus, Russia, Caucasian is used today. North Americans, white, they define themselves Caucasian.
Yes. I always ask myself where
it comes from here, from 1853, more or less, the racial classification. Also, you know, when, for example, we were talking about Balotelli, when people throw peanuts or bananas on Balotelli, or when Obama, for example, was often identified, drawn as a monkey, why not a giraffe? Why a monkey? Why associated a black person to a monkey is racist?
Because it is the lower level of evolution. Yes. In the representation, common sense representation, we come from monkeys, so the monkeys are less evolutive.
Very simple one almost, yes.
Right, exactly. And you can see here is because Africans were not considered humans. There were doubts. And so you can see how this is represented in the drawing. So you see the Greek Roman face, and then the African, and then the primate. And so you see African are in the middle, but they're very far from the Greek Roman. And so monkeys, primates. So when we see today supporters throwing peanuts to Balotelli, when we go back here, it's incredible.
There was even a campaign by HM,
the
brand.
Monkeys.
Yeah, the coolest monkey.
This was H&M, yes.
Which was
in Italy,
compared
sold one.
Calderone, Secchienge, and Orangutan.
Yes.
And Orangutan. So it's not a random association, the one with
you have the white, the baby, and he's the king of the jungle, the king of I don't remember what, and then there's the coolest monkey in jungle, which is associated to black child. Yeah.
Exactly, and so we still see today in advertisement, in everyday culture, everyday reference. Okay, let's carry on a bit.
Back. Sorry.
So another notion I wanted to give you that refer to racial classification is eugenics. What's eugenics? Comes from Greek, usually EU, EU means good, Europa, for example. Genics, gene, so good genes. And so what is eugenics? Is positive or selective breeding. So this was coined by the cousin of Darwin, Sir Galton, in 1883. And he doesn't think about color or race, he thinks about class. So we are in the second half of the 1800s. imagine industrial revolution, slums, poor people, disease, dirt. And so there is this idea of social determinism. So if people live in the condition they do, it's not because of the system, it's not because of social injustices or lack of accessibility, it's because they are bored like that. And so what the state can do? Well, the state can avoid the reproduction of these people. And so, if you go to the next slide, eugenics means discouraging the reproduction of the people that are not fit for our society. Nazi did that. This is also the Nazi project. And so, what does it mean? Going back to the idea of women's body. Well, for example, in the US, until the 1980s almost, women were sterilized. For women, black women, without their consent, without them knowing. And so in one of the videos, there was this woman who was raped when she was 13 in the 1950s. She got pregnant and she had a baby, she managed to deliver a baby, but after that they sterilized her. And so she discovered as a young woman that she couldn't have children because part of her body had been removed. And so she goes to trial, she found her kid many years later, but she wants compensation, and this was in North Carolina. And so they did an investigation and they realized there were hundreds and hundreds of cases like her. So you hear tapes of doctors talking about a certain person and saying, yeah, but I mean, maybe, what would she do with another kid? Maybe it's better if we do that. So deciding again, right, on women's body and sexuality, eugenics. So it was really applied in the US of America. And not only talking about Israel, where we were reading a few years ago how Ethiopian women were sterilized without their consent in 2017, for example. So this idea of preventing the reproduction of undesirable bodies. Eugenics. So here you have a definition. Eugenics is the idea that the state can and should intervene in demographic development by encouraging some groups to breed and by preventing others from doing so. Eugenics, good gene. Okay, so I would say we do Lombroso and then maybe we stop. Just to conclude. Cesare Lombroso, have you heard about him? Yes. Cesare, if you study criminology, Cesare Lombroso is in your textbook because he's considered the father of modern criminology. He was, he became a superstar in his time, in the 1800s, and so his theories really traveled to the other side of the ocean. And what he was saying, well, he was convinced that you could find the deviancy of people in their genes. And so he was doing a lot of analysis of dead bodies, living bodies, taking measures, and trying to find the right combination of, for example, the deviant. So if you go to Torino, there is an Lombroso museum. It's very creepy because they put all the people that he had analyzed, so the faces, the calci, cast of the people he analyzed, and under each face there is a label: thief, murderer, crazy. Obviously, the descendants of these people are alive. And so imagine going to this museum and see your ancestor being there. So it's a very problematic museum. But he wanted to trace the genealogy of the criminal. So, for example, he also made a connection between race and crime. And so he said that obviously black people represented the inferior stage of human development, And how do we recognize their inferiority? Well, it was located on the body. Lighter brain, less developed brain, dark skin tone means inferiority, a certain type of hair, and certain type of features close to monkeys. So this was the sign of inferiority. What is interesting is that Lombroso was a doctor, and so for his PhD, he went in Calabria during the unification to help. He was studying a specific disease called cretinism. So you see today we have the word cretin, right? It's a very offensive. So now that disease has another name. And so the disease implies some cognitive disability, learning disabilities. And so when he goes to the south and he sees Calabrian people, Sicilian people, who had certain phenotypic features that may be similar to North Africa, he made a realization. He thinks actually Southerns are blacks, badly whitened. And so he makes this connection between Southern Italians and Africans. That's why when Sicilians go to the US, they arrive in Ellisaya, people know these theories and they think, but you're not white, because they read these theories. So how Southern, in reality, he said, were badly whitened blacks. And this is very important. Also, though, he made a connection between race and crime. And so he said there are certain races prone to crimes. Guess who? Gypsies, Albanians, Greeks, Italians. And you think, okay, this was 1883. Now, if you go to the next slide.
So it means the poorest.
The poorest. So if you go.
The next one.
Yeah.
More.
More. Oh God. Oh, no. Okay. No. So I don't think it's there. So what if you go back? Yeah, back. Yeah, go back to the same slide. Yes, the one after maybe. Yes. So here is when he goes to the south of Italy, right? And he made the connection. He says, okay, but these people, they have this disease because when they are getting really ill, well, they become darker, their skin become bronze-like, their skull, their muzzle, their lips, and even the darkening of the skin, they seem blacks, badly whitened. And so he makes this connection. But in relation to race and crime, in 2013, there was a judge who said that, and I quote, African American Hispanics were more prone than other races to commit particularly violent crimes. Who? A judge in the US, who were coming more Hispanics, people who are Latinos, Hispanics, she said, they are more prone to commit crimes. And so imagine this one is a judge who often have probably Latinx or Hispanic people. And so imagine, right, how you do your job, having this sort of ideas in the back of your brain. So, I think maybe...
We have 15 minutes, maybe.
15 minutes?
Question.
Yeah, shall we, maybe we can, I don't know, if you have any comments or...
I have a comment with the same period. Also, we have two main perpetrators were from certain past. For example, rapists was not someone inside the feminist, but was someone, or what could be someone inside, like a really working class, a drunkard or an addict. So we started to create this division between good men and bad men, and men would behave, but they could also commit, like a crime against women, but because they were not from a certain group of society, they were not like actual. And it is the time which also the reproductive and productive workforce starting to be the division between, you know, productive and reproductive labor. Yeah. So women started to be part of the family and not of a private life.
Yeah, the division between parts.
I mean, all these kind of feelings that were the same, sì, è lo stesso periodo, con la stessa ottica comunque di definire.
Sì, so labeling, categorizing.
I think there is also an epistemological aspect that all what's been said becomes an explanation. So what I think this is very powerful because people use some ideas to explain why this happened, what should we do to solve problems.
Yeah.
So it becomes very powerful. Another explanation, but we try to have an epistemology of understanding. We don't need to take race as a cause, you know. So it has to do with the dominant epistemology.
Yes. And often now we use the biology really to explain social and economic discrimination.
Yeah.
So talking about culture, like in the US, this myth, right, that if you work hard, but who has the ability to work hard if you're not even given the right to work?
Yes.
So Italian American community are often labeled as racist in the US because there is a bit of tension with other communities like African Americans. There is this beautiful book called Are Italians White by Jennifer Guglielmo, and one of the essays is about that. So there is this Italian American man who says why they, blacks, have it so easy. We had to work so hard, and now there are quotas and so on. Without realizing that, yes, you were poor, you had to work hard, you were discriminated, you experienced violence, everything, but racism, you didn't experience racism in the way they did, because you were not part of the system. So this idea that racism is just an individual behavior and not acknowledging how racism is a structure. And so in a way, we're all racist because we live in a racist society. We cannot remove ourselves. We're all sexist, we're all racist, we're all misogynist, we're all homophobic, transphobic, because we are embedded in those structures. But of course, already acknowledging this, I think is important because make us question ourselves. Why I do that? Why I've been told I'm a racist? And so you start to unpack what kind of the way you've been socialized. So yeah, I think it's a
question. You started at the very beginning as an example talking about the rising of populism here in Italy, the Five-Star Movement and the Lega Nord, and then you went through the concept of identity. So I was asking myself, if you have any connection, historical connection between the idea of state, nation, and nationalism and this bit of the concept of rest, if the two levels go together or if there is a
absolutely, yeah. Of course, many nation states are based on nationalistic values that are embedded in racism.
Yeah.
So even the question, right? You don't look Italian, but what does it mean? Who is Italian? How do we know who is Italian? It's because we rely upon biology to construct a national identity. And so I think this is the problem that we have in Italy with these questions, is because when someone says you don't look like it, well, it's using a phenotypic idea of identity rather than a cultural idea of identity. So your sanguinis is precisely that. So when you say to people that we have a racist laws for citizenship, some people are, oh my God, what race has to do with it? Well, it's because you inherit your identity and your normality and your access and your mobility biologically, by blood. And this was made since the beginning. So when Italians are in the colonies, for example, I didn't talk about colonialism, it will be another class probably, mixed race children who were born by Italians there and then they leave. Well, in theory, they could get Italian citizenship, and how that was possible. Because already in 1909, Italian governors frame identity using anthropological criteria. So they said, if this child shows the sign of Italian blood, they can get citizenship. This was used by the fascists, so we often think about fascism as all evil, but we have to go even further. So the liberal period was the terrain that the fascists used to do further laws. So,
what from fatherland and from motherland?
What
lines were
just paternal line, just paternal until 19.
Yeah, 16, but there was some.
Until, sorry, I don't remember exactly the year. It was just the paternal line that gave you Italian citizenship. Women didn't count.
Actually, what happens to a lot of Brazilians, because there's a lot of Italian Brazilians that come here to try to get citizenship. So what happens is that mostly it's the men that went there to learn and everything, but it happens that the woman has the citizenship. So since the king was born, I think, before 1948, when it happens, you have to come to you, then you have to come to initiate like a process in, like with judges and everything, to try and go back there. So it's making her able to pass the citizenship.
Yeah. So it was, until I don't want to say, but I think it was 70 something, right? I think it was very late that when we changed the law. And so in 1933, during the fascist regime, the fascists said, okay, these children can be Italian if they show their body size of the white race. And how did you put that? Well, they were doing craniometrical tests. They were measuring the skull and the features, and if you passed certain measures, you had a certificate telling you that you were racially fit. And so this is the way to get Italian identity, Italian citizenship. And today we have a law that says if you have Italian blood, you can be Italian. So you see there is really blood, race, and whiteness are three elements that I think are very fundamental in the construction of Italian identity.
Are there questions from home? Do you have any comment, any question? Let me see if in the chat there are comments or whatever.
Maybe I have a question more practical, like since we think, okay, we know that every society hierarchizes the other, its neighbors or like its enemy, friends. What is the limit? I mean, what is considered to be like, what can we consider to be tolerable as a leveling of other people? Like, what is the limit between leveling and racism in general? Like,
labeling
in a stereotypical way, like, I mean, can we really eradicate labeling from one society to the other?
Well,
this is yes. I lectured to the PhD students this year on feminism and feminism methodologies and so on, and there was a photograph of two young people, a black one and white one, the man and the woman, and they were walking together in the nature. And I asked what you see. Nobody mentioned that there was blackness and whiteness. But I think it was censorship. I think so.
Nobody had the courage to say.
No, it's not a lack of courage. The answers were very rich. They were observing what they were saying. But I think there is sort of politically correct problem of not noticing what is there. Not saying aloud So you don't see it, maybe. You even arrive at a point that you don't see it because you are not able to tell it. But legally is also saying what you see.
Like you elicit race, but you also elicit the solution, not racism. So it's very tricky.
What do you see? I see a black man and a white woman. It's normal, right? But it's not normal now. It's no more, especially in academy, because we were in a...
Also because if there were two white people, you didn't say, oh, I see a white person and a white person. You could just see two people.
But they see blackness and they don't see it. I think it's
yeah, exactly. And this is the problem with the color-evasive approach that we have in Europe, right? That, oh, I see people, I don't see color. That for me is super problematic. Because what's the privilege to say I don't see color? I see color very well because people make me notice my color, right? What he was saying, every day you are aware of your color. So to say I don't see people, I don't see color, I see people, for me is a very privileged affirmation to make. And at the same time, in Italy, people are scared to mention color. And so they use very offensive expression like persona di colore, no? That in English, person of color is different. It's not persona di colore, it's a completely different meaning. In Italy, persona di colore is just someone...
Not to say black.
Not to say black. While just let's use colors. I mean, I prefer to use black rather than persona di colore. Persona di colore is very offensive to me. So we have this sort of inhibition to
Policy of language and policy of research.
Yes.
Well, that's the, I did my PhD in Germany, and in Germany you really see like a listing race and color in a very like politically correct way, no? And they were saying you shouldn't use race, you should use ethnicity. But if you don't use race, you don't use racism, I mean, what would you use instead? Like, they are very elitist.
Yes.
You know?
But in Italy, we don't use race usually.
Exactly.
Like, much race in the art.
I think there is a connection between Germany and Italy.
But in general, in Europe, I think, you know, people, there is this concept of this anti-racist without race. So how can you be anti-racist if you don't acknowledge this huge elephant in the room? But for some people, talking about race is inherently racist. And so often when we talk about it, people say, why are you using the word race?
Yeah.
Because people think about biological race that doesn't exist. Race genetically doesn't exist. Genetically we're basically identical. But there is this idea that we've seen has been invented and has consequences and implications. And so we need to name it, because if we don't, well, it stays invisible, but still has power. So in Europe, because of the Holocaust and because of what happened, people are extremely careful with the use, and they think that by removing it, as France did or Germany did, let's remove it from the constitution.
Like a collective sense of freedom from the colonial age.
It's like if removing race from the third article of the constitution, suddenly we are not racist anymore. It's just an easy kind of palliative solution to the problem of the race wash.
I don't like if you say razza in Italian, you imply somehow something. I don't know, like the common, now you feel it.
Yeah. But now I have to say, I understand, but now yes, we are using it more and more. Sometimes people use it in the wrong way. Someone say la mia razza, le razze. But there are more and more research now, more and more scholars working on race, talking about race in these, maybe into quotation marks, or explaining what are you referring to. So I think we need to name it, being very careful how we use it. We're not talking about races.
Critically discussing the meaning,
Yes.
And what I like so much about your presentation, and thank you by the way, is that you remember us that problems of racism were not born now because we have all those migrants. So across go back to centuries. It's transgenerational. It's something that really.
Even before slavery, the Black presence in Italy has always been here. Like if you think about Alessandro de' Medici, first Duke of Florence, 1531, at the time the most powerful man in the world that was known, he was a biracial man. Alessandro de' Medici, his mother was an enslaved woman who came from Angola, it seems. And his father was one of the most powerful popes. But people don't know about this. People don't know that Alessandro de' Medici was a brown man. And we have so many examples, but again, missing stories. We don't study that, and so we don't know.
Maybe it was a much more bidirectional level of slavery. There were white slaves in the northern Africa and black labor in our context. So it was much more balanced. There was not the white domination against the
And that's slavery in Venice, in Florence.
yeah. Moment, of course.
All right, well, thank you so much. Thank you so much. This was useful.
Okay. So let's close, and thank you very much, Angelica, for this interesting and wonderful speech. I hope this is the very beginning, and that we can continue very soon to enter deeper in this very complex and useful concept.
It takes time, as you
to
say.
change our perspectives and maybe even changing ways to think of our path of life, you know. Hopefully. Thank you. Thank you very much. Ciao ciao a tutti.
Ciao. Ciao. Ciao, ciao.